Let's begin with a simple question. What do you think shapes your decisions every day? For most of us, it's invisible forces. Ideas and values we inherit, systems we don't question. And three of the most powerful of these forces, money, time, form what I call the great illusion. They shape how we think, what we chase, and who we believe we are. Let's talk about money. We've been raised to believe that money equals success. It's measurable. It's tangible. And in many ways, it's a necessary tool for survival. Somewhere along the way, money stopped being a tool and became the destination. People don't say, I want to build something meaningful. They say, I want to make a lot of money. That's the illusion. Money was supposed to give us freedom. But too often, it becomes the very thing that traps us into jobs we hate, lives we don't love, and decisions we don't believe in. We use money to measure our worth. But money can never measure meaning. Now consider time. We say things like time is money, or I don't have time, as if it's some external force controlling us. But time is simply how we choose to prioritize. It's not that we don't have time. It's that we don't value what we say we do. We spend hours on things that make us feel busy, like money is a resource. But if we don't use it wisely, we'll reach the end of our lives full of regret, not for what we did, but for what we didn't give enough time to relationships, purpose, joy. And then there's the ego. Ego is the most deceptive of the three because it wears many masks. Sometimes it looks like confidence. Sometimes it looks like ambition. But ego, unchecked, becomes the need to prove, to win, to be seen. Ego tells us you are your title, you are your bank account, you are your followers. It thrives on comparison, and in doing so, it blinds us to collaboration, to humility, and to growth. Ego wants us to believe we're independent. But the truth is we're interdependent, we need each other. Here's the real issue. When money, time, ego become our decision-making framework, we build lives that look good on the outside but feel empty on the inside. We start chasing validation instead of value. We pursue efficiency instead of depth. We ask, how much can I get? Instead of how much can I give? The great illusion isn't that these things exist. It's that they define us. But they don't. The strongest people aren't the richest. The wisest don't race against time. And the most impactful aren't driven by ego. They're driven by service, by purpose, by something bigger than themselves. So the question we must all ask is this: what's shaping me? Because once we become aware of the illusion, we can begin to choose differently. We can use money to support our mission, not become our mission. We can protect our time for what matters, what distracts. We can shrink the ego to make room for humility, connection, and real growth. The illusion loses its power the moment we see it clearly. Fevke notes of the speech, money is a tool, not a destination. When it becomes the goal, it detaches us from meaning. It is not something we have or lose. It reflects what we prioritize. Ego blinds us to collaboration and purpose by making us chase validation. The illusion of success often replaces the reality of fulfillment. Awareness is the first step to reshaping our values and reclaiming a life of depth and purpose. Money is a tool, not a destination. When it becomes the goal, it detaches us from meaning. That idea may sound simple, but it carries profound consequences in how we lead, and make decisions. From a very young age, we're introduced to the concept that money equates to success. It's how society often measures our achievements. It's the marker of how far we've come, and unfortunately, how much we matter in the eyes of the world. People ask, what do you do? Not because they care about your mission, but often because they want to know how much status or income your title implies. Money becomes not just a medium of exchange, it becomes a symbol of identity. That's when the shift happens. That's when we move from using money as a resource to being used by it. It starts subtly. A person chooses a job not because of their values or passions, but because it pays more. They tell themselves it's temporary, just a stepping stone. But months turn into years. Slowly they begin to adapt to the comforts that the paycheck brings, the car, the apartment, the lifestyle, and now they're stuck, not by a lack of opportunity, but by the illusion of necessity. They can't leave, not because they don't want to, but because money has become the reason to stay, and the fear of losing it overshadows the desire to live authentically. They didn't set out to become hollow, but money quietly made the decisions for them. And it's not just individuals. Organizations do it too. Companies start with a mission, a purpose to serve, to create, to innovate, but somewhere along the way, quarterly profits take precedence over long-term impact. Financial targets overtake human values. The culture shifts. Employees stop feeling like people and start feeling like cogs in a machine. Decisions are no longer driven by what's right, but by what's profitable. Money, again, becomes a destination. And the result? Disengaged teams, burned out leaders, a loss of trust from the people they claim to serve. When we treat money as the ultimate goal, we narrow our vision. We start viewing every situation through a cost-benefit lens, even when the things we're weighing aren't meant to be measured in dollars. A teacher inspired a student? That doesn't show up on a balance sheet. A nurse sat beside a grieving family member after hours? That's not billable time. A leader paused a meeting to check in on someone's well-being. There's no financial metric for that. And yet, these are the moments that matter most. The moments that build trust, deepen connection, and remind us why we do what we do. The detachment from meaning happens because money is external, it's measurable, visible, and socially reinforced. But meaning is internal. It's felt, not flaunted. When the two come into conflict, society often pushes us to prioritize what we can show over what we can feel. That's why people who have plenty of money can still feel empty. Because despite achieving what everyone else told them they should want, they realized they never defined what they truly wanted for themselves. They climbed the ladder only to find it was leaning against the wrong wall. To be clear, money in itself isn't the problem, it's essential. It can provide safety, comfort, and opportunity. It can fund dreams, support causes, and empower change. But it was never meant to be the dream. When we make it the dream, we lose sight of the why behind our efforts. We stop asking, what impact do I want to create? And start asking, what's the return? We stop serving others and start serving our own image. We start confusing wealth with worth. There is a cost to chasing money for its own sake. That cost is often invisible at first. It looks like missed birthdays, ignored passions, neglected friendships. That quiet voice inside that says, this isn't it. Over time, those costs compound. And eventually, we're left wondering if we ever really lived on our own terms, or if we just followed a script written by someone else. So when we say money is a tool, not a destination, we're not rejecting money. We're reclaiming our right to define success on our own terms. We're reminding ourselves that the most valuable things in life aren't always the ones with a price tag, because when we prioritize meaning, money serves us. But when we prioritize money, we end up serving it. And that's the illusion we must wake up from. Time is not something we have or lose, it reflects what we prioritize. This statement may sound like a philosophical observation, but it's a deeply practical truth that touches every aspect of our lives. Most people go through their days feeling like time controls them, like it's this limited commodity constantly slipping away. And no matter what they do, there's just never enough of it. But that perception is misleading. The reality is, time is not controlling us, we're choosing how to spend it. Every minute of every day is a reflection of our values, our habits, and most of all, our priorities. The phrase, I don't have time, is rarely about the actual number of hours in the day. It's a polite way of saying, this isn't important enough for me right now. Think about how many times we say we want something, a healthier body, deeper relationships, personal growth, creative expression, and yet we don't invest the time to make it real. Instead, our hours get filled with things that feel urgent but aren't important. Endless notifications, social media scrolling, meetings without purpose, or saying yes to things we didn't really want to do. Then, at the end of the day, we're exhausted, not just because we've done too much, because we've done too little of what matters. And that creates a disconnect, a tension between what we claim to value and what our calendars actually show. The truth is, we all make time for what we truly care about. If a family member were in the hospital, we'd drop everything. If our business was collapsing, we'd cancel every plan to fix it. When something becomes a true priority, we rearrange the world to attend to it. So when we say we don't have time, we're often masking the deeper reality. We haven't made it matter enough. That's not always easy to admit. It's more comfortable to blame the clock than to take responsibility for what we've chosen to fill it with. In many cases, we inherit our ideas of time from culture. We're taught to equate being busy with being productive, productivity with being valuable. So we fill every hour with activity, we cram our schedules, and leave no room to breathe. But business is not the same as effectiveness. Activity is not the same as progress. Some of the most important things in life, thinking deeply, listening fully, resting intentionally, don't look productive on the surface, but they are the foundation of true clarity and creativity. Without space, we can't hear ourselves. Without pause, we can't redirect. We stay stuck in motion, but not in purpose. Time management isn't really about managing time. It's about managing choices. When we treat time as something external, we become passive, reacting to what shows up, letting our day be driven by others' expectations. But when we take ownership of our time, everything shifts. We start asking different questions. Is this meeting necessary? Is this task aligned with my purpose? Is this activity adding value or just filling space? These questions can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if we've lived in reactive mode for a long time. But they are essential if we want to regain control over our lives. There's also a deep emotional layer to how we engage with time. Sometimes we avoid meaningful things not because we don't care, but because they're hard. Reaching out to someone we've lost touch with, a sided project, addressing a conflict, all of these require emotional energy. So we fill our time with easier distractions and tell ourselves we're too busy. But in truth, it's not a shortage of time, it's a resistance to discomfort. When we realize that, we can stop blaming the clock and start confronting the real barriers. Every person on this planet gets the same 24 hours. What differentiates people is not the amount of time they have, but the awareness and intentionality they bring to it. Some use their hours to build, connect, reflect, and grow. Others drift through their days, always reacting, always overwhelmed, always waiting for the elusive right time to start living on purpose. But time doesn't give us permission. We have to give that to ourselves. The way we spend our time is the clearest indicator of what we truly value. Not what we say we value, but what we prove through action. So if our lives feel out of sync, if we're constantly stressed and unsatisfied, the answer may not be to find more time, but to take a hard look at how we're spending the time we already have. The clock isn't the enemy. It's a mirror, and what it reflects is up to us. Ego blinds us to collaboration and purpose by making us chase validation. Ego is a subtle force. It doesn't arrive loudly, and it doesn't introduce itself. Instead, it disguises itself as ambition, confidence, or even clarity. It whispers in our ear that we must be the best, that we must be seen, that we must win. Not for the sake of growth or impact, but for the sake of being noticed, praised, and admired. The dangerous thing about ego is that it doesn't just distort how we see ourselves. It distorts how we see others, how we make decisions, and what we define as meaningful. When ego is in control, we stop listening to understand and begin listening to reply. We speak not to add value, but to take credit. We don't collaborate, we compete. Even in environments built on teamwork, offices, families, partnerships, ego quietly introduces a sense of hierarchy: who's better, who's smarter, who's more respected. And in doing so, it erodes trust. Because the moment someone senses that your actions are driven by your need to be important, they begin to protect themselves. They stop being open. They stop being vulnerable. The room becomes guarded. Conversations become surface level, and potential is lost. It's important to recognize that ego isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it shows up as perfectionism, the idea that everything must go through us because no one else can do it as well. Other times, it takes the form of insecurity masked as dominance, overcompensating with authority because we're afraid to admit we don't have all the answers. Ego can even wear the mask of humility when someone pretends to be modest only to be praised for how grounded they appear. It's sneaky. It learns how to survive in environments that reward appearance over substance. When purpose is replaced by validation, the work changes. A creator starts producing what will get the most likes, not what they believe in. A leader begins making decisions that will look good in a press release, not what's right for the long term. A student stops asking questions for understanding and instead seeks the approval of grades and rankings. Slowly, what once felt alive becomes mechanical. What once felt meaningful becomes performative. And underneath it all, there's a constant anxiety, the fear that if the applause stops, our worth disappears with it. Ego also isolates us. It convinces us that asking for help is weakness, that vulnerability is dangerous, that we must do it all alone. But human beings are built for connection. Some of the greatest breakthroughs, ideas, and innovations in history didn't come from isolated genius. They came from collective effort, from diverse perspectives, from people willing to sit down and listen to each other. Ego shuts that door. It makes us defensive instead of curious. It makes us territorial instead of open. And in doing so, it limits what we can build together. One of the most profound dangers of ego is that it becomes a lens through which we filter all feedback. When someone challenges us, we don't hear it as an opportunity to grow. We hear it as a personal attack. When someone else succeeds, we don't celebrate them. We feel threatened. Instead of seeking truth, we seek affirmation. Instead of evolving, we protect our image. Growth doesn't happen in the comfort of ego. It happens in the discomfort of honesty. And honesty requires humility. There's nothing wrong with being proud of your work, with wanting to be recognized. The problem arises when recognition becomes the fuel, not the byproduct. When we start choosing paths based on what others will think rather than what aligns with our core values, we begin to lose ourselves. The further we travel in that direction, the harder it becomes to hear our own voice beneath the noise of approval. We need to reframe success, not as how brightly we shine, but as how well we light the way for others. Not as how often we're praised, but how deeply we've contributed. The ego will always push us to build monuments to ourselves, but purpose invites us to build bridges to others. And when we let go of the need to be seen as great, we often begin to do the kind of work that truly is. Yeah. Because the irony is this: when we stop chasing validation and start embracing service, that's when we actually create something that lasts. Ego may shout the loudest. It's not where real impact lies. The illusion of success often replaces the reality of fulfillment. It's a paradox that plays out in the lives of millions of people. We're taught to believe that success is the pinnacle of life, the final proof that we've made it. We measure it with titles, trophies, bank balances, and social recognition. We chase it like it's a finish line, something out there that we must run toward with everything we've got. But the truth is, in chasing this socially accepted version of success, many people never pause to ask a deeper question: does any of this actually fulfill me? The world gives us a script: go to school, get a good job, climb the ladder, make more money, earn respect, retire comfortably. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with any of those steps, the danger lies in following that script blindly, assuming that if we check all the boxes, happiness and meaning will follow. People who appear successful on the outside often carry a quiet emptiness within. They've done everything right by the world's standards. They've achieved recognition, influence, and financial security. But when they sit still long enough to listen to themselves, a question surfaces that they can't shake. Why doesn't this feel like enough? That feeling is the difference between illusion and reality. The illusion of success is about performance, looking successful, being perceived as successful. It's image-driven. It requires maintenance. It demands that we continue playing a role, regardless of how we feel internally. The reality of fulfillment, on the other hand, is personal. It's grounded in meaning. It's about alignment between who we are and what we do. What complicates this even more is how society rewards the illusion. People admire the appearance of success more quickly than they recognize genuine fulfillment. It's easier to see the car someone drives, the company they work for, or the number of followers they have than it is to understand the depth of their inner peace, the quality of their relationships, or the purpose behind their work. So people begin to prioritize what is visible. They build their lives around external indicators because those are what get noticed. But in doing so, they often sacrifice what matters most: their well-being, their passions, their true sense of self. The illusion also creates pressure. When success is defined externally, we feel the need to keep up. We compare ourselves constantly. Social media intensifies this, scrolling through curated lives, measuring our reality against someone else's highlight reel. And in that comparison, we lose sight of our own journey. We begin to believe that if we don't have what they have, we're behind. We rush, we force. We compromise just to keep pace with a standard that wasn't ours to begin with. Fulfillment, on the other hand, requires us slow down. It asks us to look inward and ask hard questions. What brings me alive? What impact do I want to make? What kind of life do I want to live, even if no one else sees it? There's another cost to chasing the illusion. It numbs us. When we base our identity on accomplishments, we fear failure not just because of the setback, but because of what it says about us. We stop taking risks that truly matter. We avoid the unfamiliar. We choose paths that are safe and impressive rather than uncertain and meaningful. In contrast, people who pursue fulfillment understand that failure is part of the process. They don't measure their worth by outcomes, but by intention. They know that a meaningful life isn't always glamorous. It's often quiet, sometimes difficult, but always rooted in purpose. The illusion of success is loud. It seeks validation. It's built on metrics, appearances, and applause. Fulfillment is quieter. It's built on contribution, clarity, and integrity. It doesn't always show up in grand gestures or public recognition. Sometimes it's the quiet satisfaction of doing what you're meant to do, even when no one's watching. So it's waking up with a sense of direction. It's going to bed with a sense of peace. And while the world may never give you a standing ovation for that, you'll know deep down that your life isn't being performed, it's being lived. The challenge is not to reject success, to redefine it, to stop asking what will impress people and start asking what will sustain me. Because when we let go of the illusion, the reality, we stop performing and start living a life that actually feels like our own. Awareness is the first step to reshaping our values and reclaiming a life of depth and purpose. Without awareness, we move through life on autopilot, driven by habits, expectations, and inherited beliefs that we rarely question. We follow routines, chase goals, and adopt definitions of success, happiness, and identity that may not actually be our own. The danger isn't that we're choosing the wrong path, it's that we're not even aware we're on a path we didn't choose. Awareness is what interrupts that cycle. It's the moment we pause, reflect, and begin to notice what's been operating beneath the surface. It's the first shift from unconscious living to intentional living. Many people wait for something dramatic to jolt them awake. A crisis, a loss, a failure, a moment when the life they've built no longer makes sense. But awareness doesn't always have to come through disruption. Sometimes it begins with a quiet discomfort, a subtle feeling that something is missing. Maybe it's the exhaustion that won't go away, the constant comparison to others, the realization that achievements don't feel as satisfying as they once did. That discomfort is a signal. It's our inner self trying to get our attention, telling us that something about the way we're living is out of sync with who we are. When we start to become aware, we begin asking different questions. Why am I chasing this goal? Who defines success for me? What am I sacrificing for comfort, approval, or convenience? These questions aren't easy. They can lead to uncomfortable truths about how we've spent our time, what we've ignored, and how we've compromised. But they are necessary, because only through honest reflection can we begin to realign our values. We cannot reshape what we cannot see. And we cannot reclaim our lives if we don't realize they've been drifting away from what matters. Awareness also helps us recognize patterns, both helpful and harmful. Maybe we notice how we say yes too often, not because we want to, but because we don't want to disappoint others. Maybe we see how we avoid silence, constantly filling our schedules and screens to escape our thoughts. Maybe we recognize how we've tied our worth to productivity, believing we must earn rest, joy, or even love. These patterns are not random. They're learned. And once we see them, we can start the slow, deliberate work of unlearning. But again, that begins with awareness. It's important to understand that awareness is not the same as judgment. It's not about blaming ourselves for the past or criticizing the choices we've made. It's about observing with clarity and compassion. We did the best we could with what we knew. Now that we know more, we can choose differently. Awareness gives us agency. It puts the steering wheel back in our hands. We're no longer just reacting to life. We're responding with intention. Awareness also expands empathy. When we become more aware of our own struggles, fears, and conditioning, we begin to understand others more deeply. We become less quick to judge, more open to listen, and more grounded in humility. This shift strengthens our relationships. It creates space for real connection, where people feel seen, heard, and valued, not for what they produce, but for who they are. And that kind of connection is at the heart of a life with purpose. Purpose is not something we stumble upon by accident. It's uncovered through awareness. We notice what energizes us, what breaks our heart, what brings us peace. We begin to track the threads that run through our most meaningful moments, and we see patterns emerge. Maybe it's teaching or creating or healing or building. Whatever it is, purpose becomes clearer when we're paying attention. But if we're always rushing, numbing, or performing, we miss those signals. Awareness is what allows purpose to surface. Reshaping our values doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to untangle ourselves from the expectations and narratives we've absorbed. But every small act of awareness is a step toward freedom. When we notice ourselves choosing people over pride, depth over distraction, and meaning over metrics, we're living differently. And that difference starts not with a dramatic change, but with a quiet noticing. With a single question, is this who I want to be? That's how awareness begins and how purpose finds its way in. The great illusion that money, time, and ego cast over our lives is not just powerful, it's subtle. It convinces us to chase things we think we want, only to arrive and feel empty. It makes us believe we're in control, even when we're being led by forces we've never questioned. But when we begin to look deeper, when we see that money is only a tool, time is a reflection of our choices, and ego is a mask that distances us from purpose, we create space for something more honest, more lasting. Space is where fulfillment begins. Awareness breaks the illusion. It opens the door to meaning, to impact, to lives that are not only successful by the world's standards, but significant by our own. The moment we stop performing and start living on our own terms, we reclaim what was always ours, the freedom to define what truly matters. And that choice, more than anything else, is the beginning of a life that is not just seen, but deeply felt.